The snow didn't fall in soft, light flakes as one might imagine. It was a whiteout curtain, thick and furious, lashing against the windshield like millions of tiny glass shards. Our car, a useless lump of metal, lay dead on the shoulder of the road, one wheel having slid into a snow-covered ditch. The engine was silent. So was the heating system. The cold began to creep in, an invisible and patient predator. Outside, the world was nothing but a white expanse and the howling of the wind. Everything became monochrome, abstract. The tall pines on either side of the road were just faint black shadows, bent before the storm. We had been driving for 6 hours, trying to leave the city behind, to leave behind the silent arguments and empty stares. This trip was supposed to be for healing, but now it only imprisoned us in a frozen tomb. Chloe sat huddled in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around her knees, her chin resting on them. Her breath puffed out in thin clouds in the frigid air. She said nothing. We had run out of words for each other hours ago, even when the car was still moving. The silence between us was heavier and colder than the blizzard outside. I knew she was scared, but so was I, and my fear had no room for comfort. I tried my phone for the 10th time. Still no signal. Completely cut off. We were somewhere on a remote mountain road in Vermont, probably dozens of miles from the nearest town. Staying in the car was a slow death sentence. The cold would kill us before anyone found us. "We have to go," I said, breaking the silence. My voice was hoarse from the cold. Chloe looked up, her eyes tired and lifeless. "Go where?" I looked out the window, through the thick curtain of snow. In the distance, on the mountainside, a faint yellow light flickered. A tiny speck of light in a white ocean. It could have been an illusion, a cruel joke played by a desperate mind, but it could also be hope. "There," I pointed. Chloe followed my gaze. She didn't object. Perhaps desperation had paralyzed her ability to argue. We put on whatever else we could find in our suitcases, an extra layer of sweaters, 2 layers of socks. I wrapped my woolen scarf around my face, leaving only my eyes exposed. Chloe did the same. When I opened the car door, a blast of icy wind rushed in, carrying snow and the feeling of 1,000 needles pricking my skin. Stepping outside, the snow was knee-deep. Every step was a struggle. The wind roared in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. We clung to each other, trudging towards the light. The car was quickly swallowed by the darkness and the snowstorm. Now it was just the two of us, 2 tiny black dots trying to survive nature's fury. The walk felt endless. My body screamed in protest. My muscles burned from the cold and fatigue. My lungs ached with every breath of icy air. At times, I lost sight of the light in the snow, and a cold panic rose in my chest. But then it would reappear, faint but steady, pulling us forward. Finally, we arrived. It was a small log cabin, nestled among giant pine trees. The yellow light shone from a single window. Smoke rose from the chimney, a sign of life and warmth. I almost collapsed from exhaustion and relief. I raised my hand, my numb fingers barely feeling anything, and knocked on the heavy oak door. A moment later, the door opened. An old man stood there. He was tall and thin, with a mess of white hair and a thick beard that covered most of his face. He wore a worn-out flannel shirt and denim overalls. His eyes were deep and bright, and they looked at us without a hint of surprise, as if he had been expecting us. I tried to explain our situation, the words disjointed and stuttering from the shivering. The man just listened in silence, then stepped back, motioning for us to come inside. It was unbelievably warm inside. A large stone fireplace was crackling in the corner, casting a golden-orange glow and the smell of burning pine. The single room served as both a living room and a kitchen. Along the wooden walls were shelves filled with glass jars, hunting tools, and stacks of old books. A few animal pelts were spread on the floor. The air smelled of wood, cooked meat, and something else, a faint, musky, indescribable odor. The man didn't say much. He pointed us to a leather-clad bench near the fireplace, then went to the kitchen and ladled out 2 bowls of hot soup for us. It was a rich and hearty meat stew. I ate ravenously, feeling the warmth spread through my body. So did Chloe. We hadn't eaten since noon. After we finished eating, he pointed to a door at the end of the room. "Guest room. Get some rest. The storm won't break until morning." Those were the first words he'd spoken to us. His voice was deep and gravelly, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. We were too tired to question anything. The small room had only a bed, a dresser, and a small window looking out into the white night. Chloe and I lay down on the bed, still in our clothes. We didn't talk, just lay there, listening to the wind howling outside and the fire crackling in the hearth. The tension between us was gone, replaced by a shared exhaustion. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up in the middle of the night, not because of any sound, but because of an absolute silence. The wind had stopped. The fire in the hearth had probably died out. Darkness enveloped the room. A sense of unease crept over me. I sat up slowly, trying not to wake Chloe. She was still fast asleep, her breathing steady. I was thirsty. I tiptoed out of bed and went to the door. My hand gripped the cold metal doorknob and turned it gently. It wasn't locked. I cracked the door open and peeked into the main room. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting an eerie, silvery blue light over the room. The man was sitting in the armchair facing the dead fireplace, his back to me. He wasn't sleeping. He was doing something. I squinted. In the dim moonlight, I saw he was holding a long, shiny object. He was sharpening it slowly, steadily on a whetstone, a hunting knife. His movements were rhythmic, deliberate, and completely silent. My heart began to pound. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I backed away, closing the door gently, trying not to make a sound. I returned to the bed and lay down next to Chloe. Sleep had vanished, replaced by a cold, alert fear. I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, listening, but there was nothing to hear but the frantic thumping of my own heart and Chloe's breathing. Hours passed. I didn't dare move. Finally, as the first streaks of dawn began to creep through the window, I drifted off from sheer exhaustion. When I woke again, Chloe was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at me. Daylight filled the room. Outside, the sky was clear. The storm was over. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You look like you had a nightmare." I didn't know how to answer. Tell her about the man and the knife? She would think I was paranoid. "Just tired," I said. We left the room. The man was in the kitchen, frying bacon. The smell was delicious. He turned to look at us, a fleeting smile on his bearded face. "Sleep well. Storm's past. Have some breakfast, then I'll help you pull your car out." His daytime friendliness made my nighttime fears seem foolish and unfounded. Maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe he was just a hunter taking care of his tools. I chided myself for being so suspicious. We sat down at the table. Breakfast was bacon, eggs, and toast. As we ate, I glanced around the room again. My eyes landed on a dark corner behind the armchair where he had sat last night. It was a stack of old magazines. But on top wasn't a magazine. It was a woman's leather wallet, red. It looked quite new, not at all dusty or worn like everything else in the room. It was out of place. An icy chill ran down my spine, worse than the cold from the storm. I tried to act normal to keep eating, but my mind was racing. Whose wallet was that? After breakfast, we bundled up and went outside with the man. He had an old pickup truck with a winch on the front. The air was crisp and cold. Everything was covered in a thick layer of pristine white snow sparkling in the sun. The scene was beautiful, but I couldn't appreciate it. The man drove his truck ahead, and we followed on foot through the snow. As we approached our car, I noticed other footprints in the snow, not just ours and his. Footprints leading from the road deep into the woods. He quickly hooked the winch cable to our car and pulled it onto the road with ease. The engine, after a few tries, finally started. I almost cried with relief. "Thank you so much," Chloe said to him. "We don't know what we would have done without you." The man just nodded, his deep-set eyes watching us. "Drive safe." I quickly put it in gear and stepped on the gas. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. As the car moved, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there, a lone figure in the white landscape, watching us until we disappeared around a bend. I drove in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel. "You're scaring me," Chloe finally said. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer right away. I kept driving, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. Only when we saw the first signs of civilization, a road sign, another house, did I pull over to the side of the road. I turned off the engine. Silence descended. "Back at his house," I began, my voice trembling. "I saw a red woman's wallet." Chloe frowned. "So?" "Chloe," I turned to look at her, "do you remember the girl on the news who went missing last week? The hiker who was alone in this area?" Realization slowly dawned on Chloe's face, replacing confusion with a silent horror. The news said, they said she had a green backpack and a red wallet, Chloe whispered, finishing my sentence. We sat there in silence. The engine ticked as it cooled. The image of the man standing alone in the snow returned to my mind. His deep, expressionless eyes, the rhythmic motion of sharpening the knife in the night, the footprints leading into the woods. Everything clicked into a horrifying picture. We weren't guests, we were survivors. I started the car again and drove away. We didn't say another word until we reached the police station in the next town. Our trip was over. But I knew, no matter how far we drove, the image of the small cabin in the snowstorm and the deadly silence within it would haunt us forever. That silence now was more terrifying than any scream. The snow started to fall just after we passed the last sign signaling the edge of the wilderness. At first, it was just small flakes, drifting like dust, melting the instant they touched the windshield. Liam, who was driving, laughed. He was always like that, overly confident in his old SUV and his driving skills. Chloe sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, searching for a decent radio station, but all she could get was the crackle of static. In the back seat, I sat next to Mark. The warmth inside the car felt artificial. Outside, the pine trees along the road began to don a thin white coat. The road ahead was an endless gray ribbon, sandwiched between two rows of dense trees. There was nothing out here but forest and snow. That was the point of the trip, to escape the city, to find a remote place to ski and build bonfires, a place where the only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. Mark was silent, as usual. He rested his head against the cold glass, his eyes fixed on the monotonous scenery gliding by. He was always the quietest in the group, a presence so still that sometimes we forgot he was there. In less than an hour, the small flakes had turned into a white curtain. The wind began to blow hard, whipping sheets of snow against the side of the car. Liam wasn't laughing anymore. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes narrowed as he tried to see through the storm. The wipers worked at full speed but seemed useless. The world outside was now a white chaos, with no distinction between the road and the shoulder. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The silence in the car became heavy, broken only by the straining engine and the howling wind. Then it happened. A jarring jolt, followed by a loss of control as the tires skidded on a patch of ice we hadn't seen. Liam tried to steer, but it was too late. The car slid off the road, plowed into a thick snowbank on the shoulder, and sank deep. The engine coughed a few times and then died. The sudden silence was almost deafening. We sat motionless for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Outside, the storm raged on. Liam swore and tried to restart the car. The engine whined desperately but wouldn't turn over. He tried again and again. It was no use. "No signal," Chloe said, her voice trembling, her phone held high in a hopeless gesture. Of course there was no signal. We were at the end of the world. We tried to push the car. Liam and I threw all our strength against it, fighting the bone-chilling wind and the thick snow. But the vehicle didn't budge an inch, the snow thicker and faster, quickly erasing our footprints, as if wanting to erase any sign of our existence here. Cold. The cold seeped through every layer of clothing, gnawing at the skin. By the time we got back in the car, my teeth were chattering. It was Mark who saw it first. He pointed through the fogged-up rear window. In the distance, faint through the curtain of snow, was a dark shape. A house. It stood alone on a small hill, looking more like a ghost than a shelter. But it was our only option. Staying in the car meant freezing to death. We gathered the essentials, flashlights, some food, blankets, and began the short but arduous journey. The wind whipped our faces, carrying tiny ice pellets that stung our skin like needles. Every step was a struggle against the knee-deep snow. By the time we finally reached the house, I was nearly exhausted. It was an old, 2-story wooden house, its paint peeled, a few window boards broken. It looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. The front door was locked, but Liam, with the desperation of a man about to freeze to death, rammed it with his shoulder, and the old latch burst open. Inside was as dark and cold as outside, but at least we were out of the wind. The air was thick with the smell of damp and rot. The weak beams of our flashlights swept over dust-covered furniture, draped in white sheets that looked like waiting ghosts. There was a large stone fireplace in the living room. It was our salvation. Liam and I found a pile of dry firewood on the back porch. Soon, a small fire was blazing in the hearth, chasing away the darkness and bringing a little warmth. We sat huddled by the fire, no one speaking. The dancing flames cast our shadows on the bare walls, making them look grotesque and distorted. Chloe curled up in a blanket, her eyes closed, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. Liam stared into the flames, his face a mask of anger and helplessness. And Mark? Mark just sat there, in a dark corner, his face almost lost in the shadows. Occasionally, when the fire flared up, I would catch his eye. An empty, emotionless gaze that made me shudder involuntarily. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the house was like someone weeping. Every creak of the old floorboards made me jump. I kept feeling like we weren't alone. The next morning, the storm had not let up. The view outside the window was still an unchanging white. Our supply of firewood was nearly gone. Liam decided he and I would go out to find more. The house had a small shed not far away. Maybe we would find something there. "We'll be right back," Liam told Chloe. "You and Mark stay here and keep the fire going." Chloe nodded, her face pale with worry. I glanced at Mark. He was still in his corner, seemingly oblivious to the conversation. Getting to the shed was harder than I thought. The snow was now up to my hips. We found some dry wood. Not much, but enough to last another day. It took us twice as long to get back. When we entered the house, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The fire was almost out, leaving only glowing embers. Chloe wasn't there. "Chloe?" Liam called, his voice anxious. No answer. "Mark, where's Chloe?" I asked, turning to the corner of the room. Mark wasn't there. A cold dread ran down my spine. We started searching. We called her name, our voices lost in the emptiness of the house. We checked the rooms upstairs. Empty. Cold rooms. Nothing. We found Mark in the kitchen. He was standing at the window, looking out at the storm, his back to us. He was strangely calm. "Mark, have you seen Chloe?" Liam nearly shouted, grabbing Mark's shoulder and spinning him around. Mark just shook his head, his eyes still vacant. It was then that I saw it. A dark streak on the wooden floor right next to Mark's feet. It led from where he stood to the slightly ajar back door. I bent down, my heart pounding. It was melted snow mixed with something red. Liam saw it too. Without a word, he bolted out the back door. I hurried after him. The red trail led us outside to the edge of the woods behind the house, and there, lying face down in the snow, was Chloe. Her blonde hair was stained a deep red. A large pool of blood had spread around her, turning the white snow a gruesome pink. Liam collapsed beside her, his scream swallowed by the storm. I stood frozen, my stomach churning. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this. I looked back at the house. Mark was standing in the doorway, a silent, dark figure against the white snow. He just stood there, watching. That night was hell. Liam held Chloe's body, refusing to bring her inside. He sat there in the storm, covered in snow, whispering nonsense. I tried to pull him in, but it was useless. Eventually, I gave up, leaving him to his grief and going back inside. I had to face Mark. I found him sitting by the fireplace, calmly adding wood to the fire. The flames roared back to life, illuminating his face. For the first time, I saw a faint smile cross his lips, a smile that did not fit the situation at all. "It was you, wasn't it?" I said, my voice hoarse. Mark didn't answer. He just looked at me, those empty eyes seeming to see right through me. His silence was more terrifying than any confession. I knew. I knew for sure it was him. He had always been different, always had a certain darkness behind his quiet exterior. The storm, this isolation, it had unleashed the monster inside him. I backed away, my hand gripping the fire poker. I couldn't be here. I couldn't stay under the same roof as a murderer. But where could I go? Outside was a white death. Inside was an even more certain one. I ran upstairs, locking myself in a bedroom. I used an old dresser to block the door. I sat in the darkness, listening to the wind and the beating of my own heart. I didn't know what Mark was doing downstairs. I didn't want to know. I only knew that I had to survive. The next morning, I awoke to a strange silence. The wind had stopped. I peered cautiously through a crack in the window. The sky was still gray, but the snow had stopped falling. The storm was over. And then I heard it. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. He was coming. I held my breath, the fire poker clenched in my hand. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. Silence. Then an immense force hit the door. The wood groaned. Another blow. The latch gave way. The door flew open, and Liam stood there. His face was a mask of madness and grief. His clothes were stiff with ice, and his eyes were bloodshot and empty like a madman's. "He's gone," Liam said, his voice a raspy, almost unrecognizable sound. "Mark. He took all the food and left. He left us." I saw the knife in Liam's hand, the hunting knife he always carried on our trips. It was bloody. "Liam, what happened?" I stammered. "She was cold," Liam said, not looking at me. "Chloe? She was so cold, I had to warm her up." That's when I understood. Liam had gone mad with grief and cold. Mark hadn't killed Chloe. Mark had seen it happen. He had run away in fear. The person I needed to fear wasn't Mark. It was my best friend. "We have to go, Liam," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "The storm has passed. We can find help." Liam shook his head. "No, we can't leave Chloe." He stepped into the room. I backed away until my back hit the cold wall. There was no escape. His crazed eyes were fixed on me. "You're cold too, aren't you?" he whispered, raising the knife. "Let me help you get warm." I don't remember clearly what I did after that. It was a blur of fear, adrenaline, and survival instinct. I just remember swinging the fire poker. I remember the scream. I remember running without looking back, out of that house, out into the white, deathly, silent world. I just walked. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to get away from that place. Finally, when my legs gave out, I collapsed in the snow. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was a bright orange blur in the distance. A snowplow. They said I was lucky to be alive. They found me only a few hundred yards from the main road. They found the house too. They found Liam and Chloe. They never found Mark. To the outside world, it was a tragedy. A group of young friends caught in a snowstorm, one missing, two dead, and one survivor in a state of shock. They assumed the isolation and the cold had driven Liam mad. They might be right. But sometimes on cold winter nights, when I hear the wind whistling outside my window, I wonder. I think about Mark, about his empty eyes, about his silence. Did he run away? Or did he get exactly what he wanted? The snow began to fall as we passed the last sign that read, "No services for the next 80 miles. It was a spontaneous trip. Leah wanted to see the snow-covered mountains, and I just wanted to escape the city with its concrete walls and incessant noise. We packed our things into the old sedan, filled the tank, and just drove west. No plan, no specific destination, just the long highway stretching before us and a playlist of old 90s music. The first snowflakes were just a few lazy white dots drifting in the air, peacefully beautiful. But within an hour, they had turned into a white curtain, angrily lashing against the windshield. The two-lane road was now just a blurry streak. Leah turned off the music. The silence in the car became heavy, broken only by the sound of the wipers working at full capacity and the whistling wind outside. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my eyes straining to see through the snowstorm. It was then that I saw it for the first time. A pair of bright headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, approaching at an alarming speed. An old high-clearance truck, the kind built to conquer rough terrain. It tailgated us so close that its lights burned my retinas. "Who is this asshole?" Leah muttered, turning to look. I slowed down, hoping the driver would get the hint and pass, but he slowed down too, maintaining that terrifying distance. My heart began to beat faster. This wasn't the impatience of a hurried driver. This was a game. After a moment, as if bored, the truck changed lanes, roaring past us. Snow and mud from its wheels sprayed up, obscuring our windshield. I only managed to see the silhouette of a large man behind the wheel before the truck disappeared into the snow ahead. We breathed a sigh of relief, but that relief didn't last long. A few miles later, my car's engine started making strange noises. The car jerked, then stalled. I tried to restart it, but it was no use. We were stranded. Outside, the world was only white. The wind howled like a wounded beast. We had no phone signal. The thought of spending the night here in the biting cold made me desperate. "We have to do something," Leah said, her voice trembling, partly from cold, partly from fear. And then, through the thick snow, we saw it. About a quarter of a mile away, the faint lights of the truck from before. It was parked on the side of the road, its engine seemingly off. Maybe that guy is stuck too, I said, trying to reassure both her and myself. We can go ask for help. That decision, made in desperation, was the biggest mistake of my life. We put on more jackets, wrapped scarves around our faces, and got out of the car. The cold attacked immediately, relentless and penetrating. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked us over. We leaned forward, taking difficult steps towards the truck. The snow was knee-deep. Every step was an effort. As we got closer, a sense of unease grew in me. The truck was strangely silent. There were no footprints around it, except for a single track leading from the driver's door and disappearing into the dense pine forest beside the road. The driver's side door was ajar. "Hello," I called out, my voice lost in the wind. No one answered. I signaled for Leah to stay put and cautiously approached. I looked inside the cabin. Empty. The key was still in the ignition. On the passenger seat was a small axe, the kind used for chopping firewood, its blade glinting faintly. A strange, metallic, unpleasant smell hit my nose, the smell of rust and raw meat. My instincts told me to turn away, to pull Leah and run as far from this place as possible. But before I could act, a huge shadow burst out from the forest. The man from the truck. He wore a dark winter suit, his face obscured by a hood and the darkness. He moved with terrifying agility in the deep snow. He didn't scream, didn't growl, he just silently rushed forward, and that silence was more terrifying than any sound. Leah screamed. I pushed her behind me and faced the man. Everything happened too fast. I felt a powerful impact and a sharp pain in my shoulder. I fell into the snow, my head spinning. The man didn't even look at me. He grabbed Leah, who was struggling in vain. He covered her mouth with one hand and dragged her towards the edge of the forest. Her terrified eyes were the last thing I saw before he and she disappeared behind the trees. The pain in my shoulder brought me back to reality. Blood was soaking through my jacket. I knew I couldn't lie here. I staggered to my feet, staring into the dark forest where Leah had vanished. The choice was simple: freeze to death here, or go in there. I started moving, following the giant's footprints. The pain, the fear, and the anger merged into a strange energy, pushing me forward. The forest swallowed all sound. The wind no longer howled, there was only the whispering of the trees and my own gasping breath. The footprints led me deeper inside. I saw specks of blood on the snow. My blood, or Leah's? I didn't dare to think about it. After about 15 minutes of walking, I reached a clearing. In the middle was a small, dilapidated log cabin, looking like it had been abandoned for decades. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin column, almost invisible in the cold air. A faint light shone from a single window. He was in there, with Leah. I hid behind a large tree, trying to control my breathing. What should I do? I had no weapon, was injured and nearly exhausted from the cold. The other guy was big, strong, and clearly insane. I looked around, searching for anything that could help. My hand touched a large, hard, heavy branch, broken in the storm. I picked it up, feeling its weight. It wasn't an ideal weapon, but at least I wasn't empty-handed. I moved cautiously, circling the cabin, looking for another entrance or a weak point. The back door was shut tight. The other windows were boarded up. Only the single window with the light remained. I tiptoed closer, peering inside through a crack in the wooden plank. The room was lit by a single oil lamp, creating dancing shadows on the walls. Leah was tied to a chair, her mouth gagged with duct tape. Her eyes were wide, filled with tears. The man stood with his back to the window, busy at a wooden table. He was sharpening the axe. The screeching sound of metal scraping against whetstone made my stomach clench. I knew I didn't have much time. Waiting meant Leah's death. I took a deep breath, the freezing cold filling my lungs. I would only get one chance. I went back to the front door. I raised the branch, using all my remaining strength to slam it against the hinge. The rotten wood splintered. I kicked the door hard. It burst open with a cracking sound. The man spun around, his face finally revealed in the light. It was an emotionless face, his eyes empty and soulless. He wasn't surprised at all. He just looked at me, then picked up his axe. He lunged at me. I swung the branch, aiming for his head. He raised his arm to block, and the branch hit his arm with a dry thud. But he seemed to feel no pain. He swung the axe. I stepped back, the blade grazing the chest of my jacket, leaving a tear. We moved in the cramped space of the cabin, a dance of death. I used the branch to keep my distance, parrying his blows. My arms grew tired. The wound in my shoulder felt like it was being torn open. I knew I couldn't hold out for long. He swung the axe again. This time I couldn't dodge in time. The blade chopped into the branch I was holding, embedding itself deep within. He yanked it hard. I lost my balance and fell backward onto the floor. The branch was ripped from my hands. He stood there, looming over me, raising the axe high. The oil lamp reflected on the steel blade. In that moment, I saw Leah. She had somehow managed to wiggle, and one of her hands had freed itself from the ropes. She was reaching for a long iron fire poker, used for the fireplace, which stood in the corner of the room. Our eyes met. A silent understanding passed between us. I kicked hard at his knee with my foot. He buckled slightly, losing his balance for a split second. Just a second, but it was enough. Leah, with a muffled scream from behind the tape, used all her strength to charge forward, plunging the iron poker deep into his side. He let out a roar, not a human one. It was the roar of a mortally wounded animal. He turned, swinging the axe towards Leah. I rolled, grabbing the small axe he had left on the table earlier. I got up, and as he turned his back to me, I used all my remaining strength to bring it down on the back of his neck. The man froze. The axe in his hand fell to the floor. He slowly turned to look at me, his soulless eyes now showing a faint hint of surprise. Then he collapsed. Silence filled the room. Only my gasps and Leah's sobs remained. I rushed to her, using my pocket knife to cut the ropes and remove the duct tape from her mouth. She threw her arms around me, sobbing. We didn't stay there. We took the man's coat, some dried food, and the oil lamp. We headed back to the highway, leaving the cabin with the body inside. The storm had begun to subside. The snowflakes were thinning. We walked for hours. Finally, as dawn began to break, painting the eastern horizon a pale gray, we saw the flashing yellow lights of a snowplow approaching. They saved us. They asked us a lot of questions. We told them everything. Months have passed. My physical wounds have healed, but there are other wounds that will never heal. Every time it snows, I remember that man's soulless eyes. Every time I'm in a quiet space, I hear the sound of metal being sharpened on stone. We survived, but a part of us died forever on that winter road, buried under the white, silent snow. The snow began to fall as I passed through Wyoming. At first, they were just lazy, solitary snowflakes, melting as soon as they touched the windshield. But as I drove deeper into the wilderness, they became denser, a white curtain slowly descending upon the world. I turned the heater up higher, the warm air blowing on my face while outside. The temperature was dropping sharply. This was the third day of my cross-country trip, an effort to leave an old life behind and start a new one in Oregon. Behind me was a bitter divorce and an empty apartment. Ahead, hopefully, was a fresh start. My old sedan, packed with the few things I had left, ran reliably on the deserted highway. I hadn't seen another car for nearly an hour, and that solitude, at first peaceful, now began to take on a different feeling. A feeling of isolation. That's when I saw it for the first time in my rearview mirror. A truck. Old, rusty, with peeling red paint revealing patches of gray metal underneath. It was miles away, just a small dot on the straight road behind me, but something about it made me unable to look away. It moved at a steady pace, no faster and no slower than me. I tried to push it out of my mind. Just another driver on the same long, lonely road. I turned on the radio, only to find static and intermittent snippets of country music. I turned it off. The silence was more pleasant. Half an hour passed. The truck was still there, but closer now. I could make out its shape more clearly. An old pickup, probably from the 70s, with a crude camper shell covering the back. Its windshield was caked with dirt, completely obscuring the driver inside. It maintained a constant distance of about 100 meters behind my car. A sense of unease crept over me. I lightly pressed the accelerator, increasing my speed from 60 miles per hour to 65. The truck also sped up, maintaining the exact same distance. I slowed down. It slowed down too. My heart began to beat a little faster. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the driver was on cruise control and not paying attention. I decided to try something. There was a rest area ahead, a simple gravel lot with a restroom and a faded map. I turned on my signal and pulled in. I parked but didn't turn off the engine. I watched in the rearview mirror. The red truck also signaled and slowly rolled into the rest area, stopping at the far end, opposite me. Its engine remained running, a low rumble that could be felt through the frozen ground. I sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel. 10 minutes passed. No one got out of the truck. Not a single movement. Just the rusty vehicle sitting there, silent under the increasingly heavy snowfall. My unease turned into real fear. This was no coincidence. I put the car in gear and hit the gas, the tires spinning on the gravel as I sped back onto the highway. I glanced in the rearview mirror. A few seconds later, the red truck also moved, its headlights cutting through the thickening snow as it merged onto the lane behind me. The game had begun, though I didn't want to play. Now panic began to set in. I floored the accelerator, the speedometer needle climbing to 80, then 85. My car started to shake from the speed on the slippery road. The truck kept pace, effortlessly. It was like a predator toying with its prey. The snowflakes now flew horizontally, whipped by the wind. Visibility dropped to just a few dozen meters. The road ahead was a white tunnel, flanked by the blurred shadows of trees. I had to strain my eyes to see the lane markings. Suddenly, the truck's high beams flashed on, shining directly into my rearview mirror and blinding me. I swore and flipped the mirror to its night setting, but the glare was still there, reflecting from the side mirrors. Then it started getting closer. I could hear its engine roaring over the sound of the howling wind. It was only a few feet from my bumper. I thought it was going to hit me. I braced for impact, my body tensing. But it didn't happen. It just stayed there, filling my rearview mirror, a huge and menacing presence. I saw a turnoff ahead, an unmarked side road leading into the forest. A crazy decision formed in my mind. Anything was better than this straight road. I jerked the wheel, my car sliding sideways as I turned onto the dirt road. The snow on this road was thicker, undisturbed. My car struggled for traction. I looked back. The truck had also made the turn, without hesitation. The road was narrow and winding, cutting through dense trees. Snow-laden branches scraped against the sides of my car. I had made a terrible mistake. I had driven myself into a trap. The road sloped upward, and my tires began to spin in the snow. The car slowed, the engine whining uselessly. Finally, it came to a complete stop, stuck. I tried reversing, going forward, but only dug myself deeper into the snowbank. In the rearview mirror, the truck stopped about 20 meters away. Its engine cut off. Silence descended, broken only by the ticking of my cooling engine and the sound of the wind whistling through the treetops. I sat there, paralyzed with fear. This was it. The truck door opened. A figure emerged, tall, wearing a heavy, dark coat and a beanie pulled down low, obscuring most of their face. They were in no hurry. They walked toward my car with a slow, deliberate gait, their boots sinking deep into the snow. I had to get out of here. I fumbled for the door latch, my fingers numb and clumsy. I pushed the door open and scrambled out, plunging into waist-deep snow. The cold was excruciating, but adrenaline numbed the sensation. I started running, stumbling, and falling in the thick snow. Every step was an effort. I didn't dare look back. I could only hear the steady crunch of footsteps behind me. No faster, no slower, a terrifying rhythm of pursuit. I plunged deeper into the woods with no sense of direction, just trying to create distance. My lungs burned from the cold air. Branches scratched my face. Snow found its way down my collar and up my sleeves. I tripped over a log hidden beneath the snow and fell flat on my face. The fall knocked the wind out of me. I lay there for a moment, exhausted, my face pressed against the snow. I turned my head. The figure was standing at the edge of the woods, about 50 meters away. They just stood there, watching. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They knew that in this cold, with night falling, I had nowhere to go. It was their patience that terrified me the most. This wasn't a hot-blooded chase. It was a cold, calculated hunt. I pushed myself up and kept running. Panic gave way to a singular determination: survive. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost its meaning. The forest seemed to stretch on forever. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw it. A faint light through the trees. Hope surged in me. I focused on that light, pushing with all my remaining strength toward it. The woods thinned, and I found myself at the edge of a clearing. In the middle was a small cabin, a thin wisp of smoke rising from a stone chimney. The light was coming from a single window. Salvation. I stumbled toward the cabin, collapsing against the door and beating on the wood with my frozen fists. The door opened, and an old man with a white beard and kind eyes looked down at me. I tried to speak, but only incoherent stammers came out. He didn't need an explanation. He looked over my shoulder toward the dark woods, then pulled me inside and slammed the door shut. It was warm inside, the air filled with the smell of burning wood and coffee. The old man helped me out of my soaked coat and gave me a blanket. I sat by the fire, shivering uncontrollably, partly from cold, partly from fear. He didn't ask many questions. He just handed me a mug of hot coffee. So, its bitter taste bringing me back to my senses. "You've run into trouble," he said, his voice low and gravelly. It was a statement, not a question. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "A red truck," I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. "It was chasing me." The old man nodded slowly, his eyes darkening. "Not the first time. Every now and then, someone goes missing on that road, especially in winter." He got up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. "He won't come near here. He doesn't like the fire." We sat in silence for a long time. I felt safe, but the horror of the day clung to me like a layer of frost. I had seen the face of a meaningless, random violence, something that exists without reason or explanation. I stayed at that cabin for 2 days, until the storm passed. The old man, whose name was Silas, shared his food and his stories. He was a trapper who had lived alone in those woods for nearly 40 years. When the snow had stopped falling, Silas helped me dig my car out of the side road. The engine miraculously started. The red truck was gone. There was no sign of it, except for the fading tire tracks in the snow. I thanked Silas. Words didn't seem like enough. He just nodded. "Be careful on your way. There are empty spaces on the map that even the map makers don't know about." I drove away, never looking back. I made it to Oregon and started my new life. But some nights, when the snow falls outside my window, I think of that lonely highway. I think of the rusty red truck and the silent figure behind the wheel. I survived, but a part of me is still trapped on that winter road, forever haunted by a nameless terror.